It sounds like this film chose poorly.
The following is a world-class Bullshitters exclusive.
Earlier this week, we discussed some Indiana Jones rumors that we believe to be false. Most of them were based heavily on speculation and information from the trailer. However, official information from Empire Magazine contradict that, and we chose to go with the magazine. Now, the film has been shown publicly at the Cannes Film Festival, and someone who claims to have been in the audience is spilling the beans. Be prepared, folks. Possible spoilers for a movie you're already ambivalent towards. Hello everyone, I had the pleasure of watching Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny at the Cannes Film Festival. I would say the movie is pretty bad, 100% the worst Indiana Jones movie. Helena is a terrible character, very annoying, and she's so disrespectful and toxic towards Indy. CGI is pretty bad, especially de-aged Ford. Overall, just a mess. But whatever, here's the synopsis. If you have any questions, ask them below. This post was edited after people requested specific scenes in the movie, so the Redditor went on to describe the entire film in great detail, folks. Get your popcorn ready, because we're going in. After the logo's introduction, no dissolve, we're thrown right into the action in 1944. I think the first shot of the movie is a door opening, leading up to seeing Indy in a Nazi uniform and a bag on his head, taken to an officer by the soldiers who claim they caught an American spy. All of this is happening while the castle is under fire and there's a lot of agitation in the background. Meanwhile, Basil Shaw is hiding in a forest nearby, looking anxiously for Indy. Cue to the scene from the trailer where Indy's face appears after the bag is taken away. The officer asked him, looking at Indy's notes, why he's looking to steal the Lance of Longinus, which was used to crucify Christ. It's a coveted prize for Hitler, who really wants it. Voller appears at some point and looks briefly at the lance in his box before it's taken away, and you can see he's noticing something. The exchange concludes by the officer ordering to take Indy away and telling him in a triumphant way, "To the victor belongs the spoils." While Basil Shaw, an Oxford scholar clearly not made for action, is caught by the Nazis looking for him with dogs and is taken aboard their train, leaving the castle on the verge of being destroyed by the Allies' bombings. Indy is about to get hung on a rope by several soldiers, but fortunately for him, a rocket drops slowly in the room and descends several floors before exploding, which kills the Nazis and makes him hung around the void thanks to the rope around his neck. But he manages to escape alive. Aboard the train, Voller is trying to reach the Nazi officer, telling him something important, but you can tell the Nazis really don't take him seriously. Meanwhile, Basil Shaw is interrogated by the officer. After knocking out a Nazi in his car, Indy takes his place at the wheel. He drives along with them and in sidecars until he decides to go off script to follow a nearby train. The sidecar ends up cut in half at some point and Indy gets on the train. First time we hear the Raiders theme very briefly. If I remember correctly, as well as the Wilhelm scream when Indy knocks a Nazi off the train. Succession of scenes where Indy progresses through the train while stumbling onto Nazis, trying, not often successfully, to blend in with them. As he progresses through the train, he manages to get back the Lance of Longinus and realizes it's a copy. Meanwhile, Voller loses his patience and informs the officers that the lance is fake and that Hitler will be disappointed to hear about it. He starts talking about the Dial of Destiny and shows it to the officer, or rather, only part of the dial which he has in his hands, and says it would be of greater interest to Hitler. It certainly is the interest of Basil Shaw. Indy manages to get to the train car where Basil is kept captive, while the Nazi officers have went the other way around without noticing him in the restaurant car, where he was hidden at a table when they passed by him. Basil tells him about the Dial of Destiny. They manage to escape on the roof where Indy kind of motivates Basil to follow him. Since he is afraid, he says, "I can't do this," after Indy has sucker punched Voller and stolen the dial. On the roof, they are witnessing the Allies' planes firing at the train, shooting a lot of Nazis. They seem on the verge of getting out, and the officer appears in front of them, the foggy scene from the trailer. Indy fights him while trying to stay alive where the train enters multiple tunnels. He manages to disarm the Nazi with his whip and throw his gun to Basil, who tells him to shoot, hence the moment where he shoots at Indy accidentally. Indy throws the Nazi off the roof and steals the line, "To the victor belongs the spoils." While Indy and Basil finally look safe, Voller comes along with a gun and orders Indy to give him the dial. Indy sends him the bag containing the dial, and Voller seems on the verge of escaping when he is hit by a side road perch near the tracks, the same kind that young Indy uses in The Last Crusade to escape Fedora. While Indy and Basil are trying to make signs to the Ally planes that they are to be saved, planes destroy the bridge ahead of the train and they have to jump in the river. They get out alive. Basil regrets that Indy had to give the dial to Voller, but Indy shows him he only threw the bag with another object, and he still has the dial. Cue the pairing shot where Indy puts his arm on Basil under the bridge, while we see the British flag raised on the remains of the train. Right after the end of the 1944 flashback, the story jumps to 1969. We discover Indy in his New York City apartment, and a traveling shot shows us the other room of his place before showing him sleeping on a sofa. We can see a black and white photo of Marion on Indy's fridge from Raiders. More importantly, their finalized divorce papers on it. Indy wakes up suddenly when he hears very loud music. It's coming from his neighbors downstairs. He yells at them through the window, but they can't hear him as they're busy with many friends, visibly starting a party. After a brief shot of Indy shirtless, he puts on an old t-shirt. Might be a baseball shirt, but I don't know. grabs a baseball bat, and goes downstairs to knock on his neighbor's door. Someone opens the door, and the neighbor says, "Oh, it's my old neighbor from upstairs," like he's used to Indy complaining. Indy indeed complains that it's 8 a.m. and he has to work when the man mocks him like he doesn't believe he's still working. He also basically tells him to fuck off since it's Space Day, the Apollo parade. Cue to the scene of Indy preparing coffee and spilling a little bit of alcohol in it before hiding Marion's picture on the fridge with a magnet in a very intent way. He then leaves his place, the street shot from the trailer, takes the subway along with a kid in a cosmonaut uniform, gets to Hunter College where he starts delivering his class about Archimedes. There's a funny quirk from Indy when a student repeats Syracuse with interest and he says Syracuse in Sicily, not in the state of New York. All the students look bored or hungover and no one replies, except Helena, who visibly knows a lot about Archimedes by her answers, but Indy doesn't recognize her. Indy also sounds very excited when talking about the clever Archimedes conceived weapons used by the Greeks against the Romans during the Great Siege of Syracuse, during which he died. Indy's class is interrupted when the students come into the room with a TV to show the parade, and the atmosphere becomes excited when Indy shuts down his own projection on Archimedes with a dispirited look. Helena then follows discreetly Indy to the professor's corner of the university, where they thank him for 10 years of service at Hunter College by offering him a big clock. He is kind of speechless, as you can tell he really dislikes this gift and says something like, "Thanks for putting on with me for all these years." He then walks into the street and gives the clock to a homeless man and walks into a bar and starts drinking. Helena follows his trail. As Helena comes to Indy in the bar and introduces herself, another scene shows Kleber, Boyd Holbrook, in a New York City hotel trying to learn German with a book. A waiter comes into the room looking for Professor Schmidt and mistakenly thinks it's him before Kleber points to Voller. Looking into the room looking for Professor Schmidt, mistakenly thinks it's him before Kleber points to Voller, looking at the parade preparation by the window, and tells him, or maybe a little bit later, whenever, that the Americans went onto the moon thanks to Voller. We also see a giant man working for Voller. Cue to a great tone-setting, character-setting exchange between Voller and the waiter, as Voller asks where he's originally from because the waiter is black, and the man says the Bronx. Voller also asks him if he fought for his country, and the man says he did set cannons up for the Allies in World War II. I think at this point Voller says that the Allies didn't win the war, but rather that Hitler lost. Anyway, you get the feeling that Voller is going to be a full Nazi racist so many years after the war. Back in the bar, Helena and Indy start discussing the dial created by Archimedes and Basil Shaw's obsession with it. Helena gloats that she's just become an archaeologist herself, seems to know a lot about the dial and says she's looking for it, and knows that her dad and Indy lost it in a river in the French Alps. You can tell Indy is suspicious since he repeatedly asked her if she remembers their last encounter, when she was a kid, and she stays evasive. He also asks her why she would want to go after the dial that drove her father crazy, and tries to sell him on the idea of a great adventure, but you can tell that he's not responding to it. He also seems shocked to learn that Basil is dead, but it might just be my interpretation. It's not clear if he's been dead for very long or not. Indy does get caught up in the discussion around Archimedes. I think it's here that they mention the dial, and though they head back to the university. In the university's locker room of antiquities, he opens a drawer and shows her the part of the dial we saw in the 1944 flashback. They mention again that there is a missing part of the dial to make it complete, and he talks about the fact that Basil was convinced the dial had time-related powers. He also finds old letters of Basil and says he wrote to him many times about the dial and didn't read all of them. Meanwhile, we have learned that Kleber is working with Mason, but their methods seem to diverge. Kleber and his accomplice are breaking into Indy's personal office when a colleague, the lady from the surprise party with glasses, asks them what's going on and is growing suspicious. They shoot her on the spot. Another colleague comes in and gets it as well, both in a very brutal way, which immediately establishes them as dangerous and threatening bad guys. Kleber finally arrives sneakily into the room where Indy and Helena are still talking about the dial, where Indy told Helena that she had lied to him by saying that Basil and him lost the dial in the French Alps and that Basil would never have lied. So why would she lie? He asks her. Kleber then arrives and threatens them at gunpoint. Helena runs away by the roof, and Indy drops the shells on the bad guys, just after Mason was shocked to find that Kleber killed 2 professionals from the university. Indy finds his dead colleagues and is in real shock. He tries to call the police but gets arrested by the bad guys. There is a shot of the retro phone covered with blood on Indy's hands, taken from the corpse of his dead colleague. Helena manages to run away on the roof. Indy is taken into a van by Kleber and the others, and he quickly understands that they are CIA. Oh, this sounds like Mac again. After the driver nearly drives through the barrier blocking the parade, he tries to drive back but then crashes into a taxi that screams at him, so they have to continue by foot. They then arrive at a peace protest where Indy starts screaming a peace slogan to get into the crowd before stealing a pan cart and hitting of his kneecaps with it. Kleber then starts shooting in the air, which frightens the crowd. Indy then runs into a police officer nearby, near the police officer's horse, and tells him to stop, but Kleber doesn't seem to be bothered, so Indy steals the horse. Ensues is the parade chase, very short but fun. The CGI of Indy on the horse is way better than in the trailer, but still looks like CGI. There is a chase down in the subway where Indy barely escapes before escaping another one on the track. He then arrives at the next station and gives the horse reins to a lady, and casually jumps into the train before Mason arrives. Indy says to his bemused train neighbor, The subway goes faster than the horse. Later on at night, we see Indy looking at the news report from a TV store where he learns he is accused of the murders of his colleagues. The news report also mentioned that it's believed that Indy has lost his son in the war and that he is divorced. As he tries to convince a man watching the news with him, then telling him, "It's you," the guy gets knocked off screen, and here appears Sala, who has a rendezvous with Indy. We then discover Sala's apartment and grandkids, learning that Indy helped his family emigrate to the US during the war, and he is forever grateful for it. Sala then drives him to the airport where Indy plans to go to Morocco as he suspects Helena will try to sell the dial at an antiques auction organized by local mobsters. Voller knows about this as well and is heading to Morocco. Sala then mentions he misses the sea, the desert, and the adventure, but Indy tells him that those days are long gone and that he is not an adventurer as the police is looking for him for murder. He also refuses Sala's proposition to travel with him to help him. He finally says, "Give them hell, Indiana Jones," before Indy is nearly hit by a car crossing the street, which Sala is looking uneasy once again, and Indy is looking like he definitely is not ready or eager for an adventure. Indy then drinks some alcohol on the plane. He sees his reflection in the window and remembers his last encounter with Basil Shaw as Helena as a kid. It's a flashback scene where Indy looks younger, de-aged again, but more like in his 50s or something. He has a tense exchange with Basil in his office and saves part of the dial from being destroyed by Basil, who says it has to be destroyed because it's very dangerous. He offers to take it with him and Basil makes him promise that he will destroy it. Helena overheard this conversation, so she knows from the get-go that Indy had the dial and he betrayed his promise to Basil. As he leaves for his car, Helena runs to him and gives him his hat, and he promises that her father will be better, as he's seen getting nuts with his obsessions for the dial, and that he will give her news. It seems he never did, hence some anger from Helena. The flashback ends with Helena looking at her own child reflection and the flight to Morocco. Cue the traditional Indy traveling map, slightly modernized. Aboard the Voller plane to Morocco, Mason tells him that the CIA can no longer let him follow his quest for the dial, which they only allowed him in order to be nice for his service in the Apollo mission. Now that his men have killed professors at Hunter College and that Voller himself has ditched a meeting with the US president in Los Angeles. As some CIA members are about to divert the plane back to the US, Kleber and his men tear gas them and someone, I think Voller, shoots Mason who dies. Indy, in costume, walks into the bar where Helena is planning to sell the dial in the auction back room. Teddy, who is learning some piloting craft from a pilot drinking nearby, tries to prevent him from accessing the room, but he can't. He also lets Voller walk in shortly after. Cue the exchange about capitalism between Indy, Helena, and Voller, who genuinely doesn't seem to recognize Indy, though he did consult his CIA file in New York City. We then see Anthony Ingruber quite a lot as one of the bidders. After the Indy whip scene and gunfire from the trailer, the chase for the dial begins. There are several twists and fast-paced action scenes, but Voller ends up with it and Indy and Helena go after his car, but they are stopped by Helena's former fiancé, a local mobster who wants to kill her. By the way, Helena is clearly depicted as a capitalist, after the money woman who only stole the dial to resell it to the highest bidder. Teddy comes to the rescue in a tuk-tuk, hence the chase. Great action scene where Indy, Helena, and Teddy each drive the tuk-tuk. Voller and the gang finally get to their helicopter as Indy's tuk-tuk can't run anymore due to the multiple shocks it took. As Indy and Helena banter about the situation and go into a war of who is more useful than the other in the quest for the dial, they mention that they have found an artifact that indicates the place where Archimedes might have stolen the other part of the dial. It should be deciphered with a Greek code, but there are only two of them, one which Indy can translate and the other one that Helena can. I think it's in the Aegean Sea, and Indy gets the upper hand by saying he knows a guy with a boat and driving skills. They then meet Antonio Banderas' character and go looking for the artifact in his boat. There's a scene on the boat, very emotional, where Helena asks Indy what historical event he would attend if the dial indeed had time travel powers. He answers that he would prevent his own son from dying in the war, which he did to piss him off, he says, and collapsing her mother into despair, thus leading to the end of their union. What? Helena is moved by this and doesn't quite know what to answer. Indy, after reading the Basil letter on the plane, realizes that the two dates of interest are in his notes. 8/2039, days leading to the start of World War II, and 8/2069, which is a few days away. At this point, we know that Basil's guess was that Archimedes, through mathematics, realized that the dial could predict time faults in the sky, which would allow, once you can read it, to go there and time jump to another time. In the morning, the team of Indy, Antonio Banderas, and Helena prepare the underwater exploration with a 3-minute time limit. They find the artifact and eels come out of it. After Indy was scared on the boat when Teddy said they were like snakes, he says, "No, they don't." Meanwhile, Voller and his crew arrive in another boat and get the artifact just as Indy, Helena, and Antonio's character get out of the water. Voller orders Indy to translate the Greek code on the artifact, but he refuses. He threatens to kill Antonio's character, and then does in cold blood in front of Indy, so Helena starts translating the code after negotiating a money deal with Voller. Once they find the missing part of the dial, Indy is disappointed by Helena's behavior, but realizes as she makes some explanation about the riddle, just translated in Archimedes' history, that she has hidden some dynamite previously taken on Antonio's boat in her back pocket. At some point, she asks Voller to give him a cigarette, and he manages to discreetly give it to Indy so he can light the fuse. After having affirmed that the riddle means the missing part of the dial is in Alexandria's library in Greece, she throws the dynamite which explodes downstairs. Indy, Teddy, and Helena escape on the other boat, And she celebrates her move, but Indy calms her down, saying, "We just lost a friend." They then realize the artifact was not entirely explored, as, by burning it, she finds the true form and its true legend. In the code only Indy can decipher. Thus they realize that they must head to Sicily, to Archimedes' tomb, where Voller goes on a false trail. He sees them heading west instead of east, so he follows them, as his boat can still run. As Indy buys some stuff in order to explore the caves of Dionysus, where the dial is supposedly hidden, Teddy tells Helena she is now being bossed by Indy, which he refutes and says she's still in control and will still be able to sell the goods they find during their quest. As Indy told them on the boat, the artifact should be in a museum. As Teddy drifts off and steals some money from a teenager to buy ice cream, he encounters Voller and his men, who kidnap him. Indy realizes it and tells Helena they will use Teddy's knowledge of the artifact to get the dial, so he's basically safe and won't be killed. Indy and Helena steal a wedding car and head to the cave, which is a touristic place open to the public. They indeed arrive first and realize that, according to the riddle, the dial is hidden in the part of the cave with the most echo. They find a crescent moon opening near the top of the cave and start climbing towards it. Helena mocks Indy for having some trouble climbing, hence the lines about Kali being shot 9 times, and we learn that he has some vis and plagues under his legs or knees. And he says, "Why are you stopping?" He snaps back, "I'm thinking." Alternative shots of Indy and Helena progressing through the cave and stumbling into a corridor full of insects like in the Temple of Doom, plus tarantulas. Even Indy sounds kinda scared about it. While Voller and his gang follow their tracks, much like the Last Crusade final Enigma sequence, at some point Teddy, who is being handcuffed to the giant man since he tried to escape, falls into the water with him after the frail rope bridge collapsed. He manages to steal him the key and escape the water while the giant dies drowned. So no Indy fight for him. After solving a booby trap, by using a water pressure, Indy and Helena cross the room where Archimedes' tomb is hidden. They're then taken aback by the fact that the mural drawings show a raven with a metal claw, i.e. a futuristic look, that are what to appear to be ancestors of watches. As Indy mentions, watches wouldn't be invented for 1,000 years after Archimedes. They find missing parts of the dial in the tomb, but Voller arrives at that point. He orders Indy to give him the dial. He seems reluctant, but Voller threatens to kill Helena and mentions that she is the only family member he has left. Indy gives him the dial as he assembles it, but Teddy, who has also been sneaking into the room, then jumps on Kleber. First 1969 gunshot scene where Indy uses a gun. And he still seems good at it, but he gets shot in the shoulder. He is clearly hurt, and Helena wants to save him, but Teddy says, "Let me take him. We'll save him once we're out of here." Voller and his crew take Indy into a van, heading to the airport where Voller wants to fly a plane to the time vault where Helena and Teddy chase them, discreetly on a stolen bike. As Indy is taken aboard the plane, Helena instructs Teddy to fly the plane, though he has never done so before. She then goes on to catch the Nazi plane after a bike chase. On board, Indy and Voller have a great exchange. "You should have stayed in New York. You should have stayed out of Poland." And Andy asks him who he wants to assassinate to change history and make Germany victorious. Churchill, Roosevelt, then Voller tells him that he wants to kill Hitler to prevent Germany from invading Poland and committing this big mistake, saying that history is a succession of wars and that you have to be on the victor's side. As he calculates the coordinates from the dial on the time fault, that they have come dangerously close to it and there's a few seconds left, Indy tells him that Archimedes didn't know about the continents moving, thus they can't be heading to 8/2039. Indy starts laughing almost hysterically, which makes Voller doubt his decision as he tries to stop it at the last minute. But they're drawn into the time fault, along with Teddy's plane behind. Voller erupts in triumph as he thinks they've arrived in Sicily in 1939, before realizing that they're in Sicily but 2,000 years before, precisely during the Roman siege of Syracuse, with a lot of boats, arrows, catapults, and stuff. In Sicily, we see Archimedes trying to complete the Dial of Destiny when he tells them that dragons have arrived, the 2 planes. They head outside in amazement while the city is under siege. Kleber shoots frantically with his gun, and then the machine gun at the ships, and other soldiers calling them savages. On the plane, Helena drops several Nazis out of the airplane by activating a switch that opens up the ground. As the plane is getting hit by lances from the Romans or Greeks or both, Indy manages to untie his ropes with a lance nearby and get free. He then stumbles upon Helena and gives her a parachute, but Voller tries to get it from her until he is disarmed. Helena and Indy jump with the parachute while Voller and Kleber crash the plane. On the ground, Indy is in awe of what he is witnessing, like a little boy seeing his dream come true, as he tells Helena to leave him there, and get back to the plane with Teddy, who also landed safely nearby. Archimedes just saw the corpse of Voller, horribly burned, his face can't be recognized, and his watch, and he took the complete dial from him. He comes to meet Indy and Helena. Indy talks to him in Greek. Helena tells him that Archimedes has rigged the dial, and making sure it only sends them back to Syracuse the day of the siege so that they could save him. We understand that thanks to this jump in time, he found his knowledge about watches, and on how he completes the dial. Helena desperately tries to convince Indy to get back to the present with her, and tells him that he would change the course of history by staying, but he refuses to listen to her, and he says there is nothing for him in 1969. She then punches him in the face and the screen fades to black. Indy wakes up back in his bed in New York City with a lot of bandages on him and several pills around the room. He gets out of bed, finds Helena, and reproaches her for having brought him back to the present, although there is nothing left for him. She says there is though, and at the point we see Marion, clearly aged, entering the apartment with a bag of groceries, and says there is no food at all in the fridge. Indy is shocked to see her and asks her why she's back. She says she's been told he has returned and then asks him if Indy has returned, which means he is not the same after Mutt's death, i.e. the drinking problem maybe. Teddy and Sala arrive and Teddy asks for ice cream, but Helena tells him they can get it outside. He says Marion bought ice cream and Helena claims that the one outside is better, clearly looking to let Marion and Indy have some intimacy. As they head out, we hear Sala sing the song after being kissed by Marion in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Marion then asks Indy if his shoulder is hurt. They then reenact the boat scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark in reverse order before Indy kisses her. The camera then moves to the balcony of the apartment where we see Indy's hat drying on a line. The screen reduces to a small circle like the Tom and Jerry cartoons, circling the hat and appearing to end there, just before we see Indy's hand, can't be 100% sure, getting the hat back inside. The end. So, that's it. Mutt dies in Vietnam and, well, you heard the rest. So folks, what do you think of this? Do you think it's real? And if so, do you like it? This seems a lot more credible. This seems likely, and this one has a lot more detail in it. It doesn't just talk about the trailer, it talks about specifics and gives credible connective tissue between the trailer moments, the article, and more. So this one seems pretty elaborate for a fake, but I haven't seen the film, so let me know what you think about this. Here are your 3 questions. 1, do you think this is real? 2, what do you think of the film? And 3, why is Helena such a big part of this movie? We'll talk about that later. But folks, thank you for watching. I'll be back next time with more. But in the meantime, be smart, be safe, be cool, but always be excellent to each other.